It's important to remember the lessons of the past to build a better future.
My name is Delphine Hargrove, and I'm 73 years old. For most of my life, I believed that if you loved your family hard enough, sacrificed enough, gave enough, they'd love you back the same way. I raised 3 children in a modest 2-story house in Cedar Falls, Iowa, with a wraparound porch and a garden that bloomed every spring like clockwork. My husband, Walter, died 12 years ago from a heart attack while mowing the lawn on a Saturday morning. One moment he was there, wiping sweat from his brow. The next, he was gone. Just like that. Life has a cruel way of changing everything in a heartbeat. After Walter passed, I learned to live alone. I kept the house spotless, volunteered at the church every Wednesday, and hosted Sunday dinners for my children and their families. My daughters, Lorelai and Marjorie, lived out of state. Lorelai in Oregon with her wife and 2 adopted sons, and Marjorie in Texas with her corporate job and no interest in settling down. But my son, Garrett, he stayed close. Only 20 minutes away in the next town over. For years, that brought me comfort. I had someone nearby, someone who'd check on me, someone who remembered his father's face and the way we used to dance in the kitchen when the radio played Patsy Cline. Garrett was my baby, my youngest, 42 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, like Walter, with kind hazel eyes that crinkled when he smiled. He worked as a civil engineer, made decent money, owned a small house with a 2-car garage. He'd been single for years after a bad breakup in his 30s, and honestly, I'd stopped hoping he'd find someone. I just wanted him to be happy. So when he called me one spring evening in 2019 and said he'd met someone special, my heart swelled. I could hear the excitement in his voice, the nervousness, the hope. He said her name was Sloan. Sloan Vickery. She was 36, worked in pharmaceutical sales, and had recently moved to Iowa from Nevada after a divorce. I should have paid attention to that last part. The divorce. The fact that she'd left an entire state behind and never mentioned why. But I didn't. I was too happy for Garrett, too relieved that my son had found love again. When he brought her to Sunday dinner 3 weeks later, I opened my door with a smile so wide my cheeks hurt. Sloan stood on my porch in a white linen dress, oversized sunglasses perched on her head, holding a bottle of wine that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. She was beautiful. Sharp cheekbones, auburn hair that fell in perfect waves, lips painted a bold red. She looked like she belonged in a magazine, not in my simple living room, with its floral curtains and faded family photos on the walls. "Mrs. Hargrove," she said, extending a manicured hand. Her grip was firm, her smile dazzling. "I've heard so much about you." I took her hand, feeling the cold metal of her rings press into my palm. Something about her felt off, but I pushed it down. I told myself I was being paranoid, overprotective. This was Garrett's happiness, and I wasn't going to ruin it with suspicion. I invited her inside, poured her a glass of sweet tea, and listened as she talked about her job, her love of yoga, her plans to renovate Garrett's house. She spoke with confidence, with charm, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. And Garrett sat beside her, holding her hand, looking at her like she'd hung the moon. That dinner, I convinced myself everything would be fine. I convinced myself Sloan was just adjusting, that she'd warm up to me, that we'd become close. I had no idea I was welcoming a viper into my life. No idea that 3 years later, I'd be sitting at my own kitchen table, watching her spit into my mashed potatoes while my son stood silent in the doorway. No idea that the words she'd say next would shatter me in ways I didn't know I could break. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it all unraveled. How love turned to poison. How family became my greatest wound. Garrett and Sloan got engaged 6 months after that first dinner. He proposed on Christmas Eve in my living room, right in front of the tree we decorated together. Me, him, and Sloan. She'd insisted on bringing her own ornaments, sleek silver and gold baubles that clashed with my collection of handmade ones from when the kids were little. But I didn't say anything. I just watched as Garrett got down on one knee, his voice shaking as he asked her to marry him. Sloane cried pretty tears that didn't smudge her mascara, and she said yes. Everyone clapped. I clapped too, even though something in my chest felt tight. The wedding was planned for the following October. Sloane took over everything. She hired a wedding planner, rented out a vineyard 2 hours away, and sent invitations that cost more per piece than my monthly water bill. I offered to help, bake the desserts, arrange flowers, anything. But Sloane waved me off with a practiced smile. "Oh, Delphine, you're too sweet, but we've got professionals handling it. You just relax and enjoy being mother of the groom." Her tone was sugary, but there was something dismissive underneath it, like I was a child being patted on the head. Garrett didn't notice. Or maybe he did and chose to ignore it. I wore a lavender dress to the wedding, something modest and appropriate. Sloane had requested that the mothers wear muted tones, so as not to distract from her bridal white. Her own mother, a rail-thin woman named Cordelia, who looked like she'd had one too many facelifts, wore beige and spent the reception complaining about the humidity. I tried to make conversation, but Cordelia looked through me like I was furniture. I realized then that Sloane's coldness wasn't just directed at me, it was a family trait. These people measured worth in dollar signs and social status, and I had neither. During the reception, I watched Sloane work the room. She laughed with Garrett's colleagues, posed for endless photos, and danced with her father to a song that made everyone cry. She looked radiant. Perfect. But when she passed by me near the dessert table, her smile dropped for just a second. She leaned in close, her breath smelling like champagne, and whispered, "I hope you're not expecting us to do Sunday dinners at your place every week. Garrett and I need our space." Then she straightened up, smiled like nothing had happened, and glided away. I stood there, frozen, a piece of wedding cake turning to ash in my mouth. I told myself it was the stress of the wedding, that Sloane was just overwhelmed and didn't mean it. But deep down, I knew. I knew she didn't like me, didn't respect me, saw me as an obstacle, not a mother-in-law. And the worst part, Garrett was oblivious. When I tried to bring it up gently a week later, he laughed it off. "Mom, Sloane loves you. She's just not used to big family dynamics. Give her time." So I gave her time. I gave her patience. I gave her every benefit of the doubt, and she used every bit of it to slowly push me out of my son's life. The Sunday dinners stopped. At first, it was once a month, then every other month, then only on holidays, and even then, they'd arrive late and leave early. Sloane always had an excuse: work, exhaustion, plans with her friends. Garrett would apologize, kiss my cheek, and promise they'd come by soon. But soon never came. I started to feel like a stranger in my own son's life. I'd call, and he'd answer with that distracted tone people use when they're only half listening. I'd invite them over, and Sloane would politely decline on his behalf. It was death by 1,000 small rejections, each one so subtle I couldn't point to a single moment and say, "This is where it went wrong." It was all of them. Every ignored call, every canceled visit, every holiday where I sat alone at a table set for 3. If you've ever felt pushed aside by someone in your family, hit that like button. You're not alone. And trust me, this story is just getting started. 2 years into their marriage, Garrett and Sloane bought a new house. Not just any house, a sprawling 4-bedroom colonial in an upscale neighborhood with manicured lawns and HOA fees that cost more than my mortgage used to be. Sloane posted photos of it on social media constantly. The marble countertops, the walk-in closets, the heated bathroom floors. I wasn't invited to see it in person for 3 months. When I finally was, it was only because I insisted, telling Garrett I wanted to bring them a housewarming gift. I showed up with a homemade apple pie and a potted fern for their front porch. Sloane opened the door in yoga pants and a sports bra, her hair in a high ponytail, AirPods still in her ears. She looked surprised to see me, even though Garrett had confirmed the visit. "Oh, Delphine. Right. Come in." She stepped aside, barely looking at me, and I walked into a house that looked like a magazine spread. Everything was white, gray, or chrome. There wasn't a single family photo on the walls. No warmth, no life, just expensive emptiness. Garrett was upstairs on a work call, so Sloane gave me the tour. She showed me each room with the pride of someone showing off a trophy, pointing out the cost of the light fixtures, the brand of the furniture, the custom closet organizers. When we got to the guest room, a sterile space with a queen bed and nothing else, she said, "This is where you'll stay if you ever visit overnight." Which, probably won't happen often. We're very busy. The way she said visit made it clear I wasn't family. I was a guest, an occasional, barely tolerated guest. I tried to connect with her that day. I really did. I asked about her job, her hobbies, her plans for the house. She answered in short, clipped sentences, checking her phone every few minutes. When I asked if she and Garrett were thinking about kids, her face went hard. "That's personal, Delphine. And frankly, not your business." I felt my face flush. I'd only asked because I was excited at the thought of grandchildren, but she made me feel like a nosy intruder. Garrett came downstairs then, and Sloane's demeanor shifted instantly. She smiled, wrapped her arms around him, and cooed about how she was just showing me around. He kissed her forehead and asked me how I liked the place. I lied. I said it was beautiful, because what else could I say? That visit set the tone for everything that followed. I was only welcome on Sloane's terms, which meant I was rarely welcome at all. She controlled Garrett's schedule, his time, his attention. When I'd call, she'd answer his phone and say he was busy, even if I could hear him in the background. When I'd suggest we all grab dinner, she'd counter with a date 3 weeks out, then cancel the day before. She was systematically cutting me out, and Garrett either didn't see it or didn't care. I started to feel invisible, like I was fading from my own son's life, one ignored call at a time. My daughters noticed. Lorelai called me one night after I'd mentioned casually that I hadn't seen Garrett in 6 weeks. "Mom, that's not normal," she said, her voice tight with concern. "You need to talk to him. Really talk to him." But I was afraid that if I pushed too hard, I'd lose him completely. Afraid that Sloane would convince him I was the problem, the overbearing mother who couldn't let go. So I stayed quiet. I swallowed my hurt and told myself things would get better. They didn't. They got worse. So much worse. My 72nd birthday fell on a Tuesday in March. I didn't expect a party or anything extravagant. I'd long since stopped hoping for that. But I thought, maybe Garrett would stop by. Bring a card. Share a cup of coffee. We'd always celebrated birthdays in our family, even small ones. Walter used to wake me up with pancakes and a single rose from the garden. After he died, the kids took over, calling first thing in the morning, sending flowers, making sure I didn't feel alone. But this year was different. I woke up to silence. No calls, no texts. I checked my phone 3 times, thinking maybe I'd missed something. Nothing. I made myself breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, and ate it at the kitchen table, staring at my phone like it might ring if I willed it hard enough. Lorelai called around noon from Oregon, singing happy birthday off-key and promising to send a gift. Marjorie texted a heart emoji and said she'd call later when she wasn't in meetings. But Garrett? Nothing. Not a word. By 6 in the evening, I couldn't take it anymore. I called him. It rang 4 times before Sloane answered. "Hargrove Residence," she said, like she was answering a business line. I could hear music in the background. Laughter, the clinking of glasses. They were having a party. "Hi, Sloane? It's Delphine. Is Garrett there?" There was a pause, a long, deliberate pause. Then she said, "He's busy, Delphine. Can I take a message?" My throat tightened. "It's my birthday," I said, hating how small my voice sounded. Another pause. "Oh well, happy birthday. I'll let him know you called," and she hung up. I sat there, phone in hand, staring at the wall. My son had forgotten my birthday. Or worse, he'd remembered and chosen not to call. I felt something crack inside me, a fracture I didn't know how to fix. I spent the rest of the evening in my rocking chair by the window, watching the sunset, wondering when I'd become so unimportant, when I'd stopped mattering. The next day, Garrett texted a single message that said, "Sorry, Mom, yesterday was crazy, belated happy birthday." No call. No explanation, just a text that felt like an afterthought. I didn't respond right away. I needed time to think, to process the hurt that was spreading through my chest like ice water. When I finally did reply, I kept it simple. "Thank you." I didn't tell him how much it hurt. Didn't guilt him or demand an apology. I just swallowed it down, added it to the growing pile of pain I was carrying. Because that's what mothers do, isn't it? We endure, we forgive, we keep loving even when it's killing us. But that birthday was a turning point. It was the moment I realized I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Something had to change. I just didn't know what, not yet. 3 months after my forgotten birthday, Garrett called me. It was a Saturday morning and I was in the garden pulling weeds from around my rose bushes. When I saw his name on my phone screen, my heart lifted despite everything. Maybe he was finally reaching out. Maybe things were turning around. "Hey, Mom," he said, and his voice sounded lighter than it had in months. "Sloan and I want to have you over for dinner next Friday. Just the three of us. Sloan's making pot roast." I should have been happy. I should have jumped at the chance. But something felt off. Sloan never cooked for me. She barely spoke to me when we were in the same room. Why now? Why the sudden invitation? I pushed the doubt away and said, "I'd love that, sweetheart." "What time?" We settled on 6 o'clock. Garrett said he was looking forward to it, that it had been too long, that Sloan was excited too. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to believe him so badly. That week I prepared like I was going to a job interview. I picked out a nice blouse and slacks, got my hair done at the salon, even bought a bottle of wine to bring with me. I told myself this was a fresh start, a chance to build a real relationship with Sloan. Maybe I'd been too sensitive before. Maybe she was trying now. I drove to their house on Friday evening with hope fluttering in my chest like a caged bird. When I pulled into their driveway, I saw lights on in every window, warm and inviting. I took a deep breath and rang the doorbell. Sloan answered. She was wearing a black wrap dress and heels, her makeup perfect, her smile wide. "Delphine, come in." She ushered me inside, taking my coat and the wine with exaggerated enthusiasm. The house smelled amazing. Roast beef, garlic, rosemary. My stomach growled. Garrett appeared from the kitchen, apron tied around his waist, grinning like the son I remembered from years ago. "Mom, you look great." He hugged me and for a moment I felt like everything might actually be okay. Like, maybe we could fix this. Dinner was set up in their formal dining room. The table was laid out beautifully. China plates, cloth napkins, candles flickering in the center. It looked like something from a lifestyle blog. I sat down and Sloan brought out the food: pot roast, mashed potatoes, green beans, rolls. It looked delicious. We made small talk, safe, surface-level conversation about the weather, Garrett's work, the new Italian restaurant downtown. Sloan laughed at all his jokes, touched his arm affectionately, played the role of loving wife with Oscar-worthy skill. I almost let my guard down. Almost. Then came the moment that changed everything. Sloan excused herself to get dessert from the kitchen. Garrett went to help her, leaving me alone at the table. I heard them talking in low voices. Then Sloan's laugh, high-pitched and sharp. They came back out, Sloan carrying a plate of brownies, Garrett refilling my water glass. Sloan set the plate down and said, "Delphine, before dessert I made you a special plate. I know how you like your potatoes extra buttery." She handed me a bowl of mashed potatoes, piping hot with butter pooling in the center. I thanked her, confused but touched, and then I saw it. Just for a second, a flicker of something dark in her eyes, a smile that didn't match the hatred on her face. You guys, my heart is already breaking writing this. If you're feeling the same way, drop a comment below, and make sure you're subscribed. You're not going to believe what happens next. I picked up my fork, ready to take a bite of those mashed potatoes Sloan had so graciously prepared for me. I was hungry, and despite everything, I wanted to believe this gesture was genuine, that maybe, just maybe, she was trying to be kind. But as I brought the fork close to my mouth, I noticed something, a slight shimmer on the surface of the potatoes. Something that didn't look like butter. My hand froze mid-air. Sloane was watching me intently. Her green eyes locked on my face, waiting. Garrett was talking about something, work, maybe, or a new project, but I wasn't listening. All I could focus on was that bowl, and the feeling in my gut that something was very, very wrong. I lowered my fork slowly, set it on my plate, and looked up at Sloane. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice dripping with false concern. "You haven't touched your potatoes. I made them special for you." That's when I saw it. A tiny strand of saliva connecting her lips, barely visible in the candlelight. She'd just done something. My stomach turned. I'm not that hungry," I said, pushing the bowl away slightly. Sloane's smile faltered. For just a fraction of a second, I saw anger flash across her face. Then it was gone, replaced by that practiced sweetness. "Oh, come on, Delphine. I worked hard on those. Just one bite?" She picked up the bowl and pushed it back in front of me. Garrett looked up then, noticing the tension. "Mom? You okay?" I didn't know what to say. How do you tell your son you think his wife just contaminated your food? Without proof, I'd sound insane. I'd sound like the bitter mother-in-law who couldn't accept his marriage. So I did something I'd never done before. I lied. "Actually, Garrett, I'm not feeling well. I think I might be coming down with something. Maybe I should head home." I started to stand, but Sloane stood faster. "Nonsense," she said, her voice sharp now, the sweetness stripped away. "You're not leaving. You're going to sit down, eat the food I prepared, and stop being so dramatic." The room went silent. Even Garrett looked shocked. I'd never heard Sloane speak like that before. Not in front of him, but she wasn't done. She leaned down, close to my ear, and whispered words that would echo in my nightmares for months to come. "I spit in those potatoes, you old hag, and you're going to eat them and thank me, because if you don't, I'll make sure Garrett never speaks to you again. Enjoy it. They won't feed you this well in the nursing home where you're headed." Time stopped. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. My entire body went cold, like someone had dumped ice water over my head. I looked at that bowl of potatoes, at the food I'd almost put in my mouth, and felt bile rise in my throat. Sloane straightened up, her smile back in place, and said in a normal voice, "Actually, Delphine, if you're not feeling well, maybe it is best you go home. We wouldn't want you to get Garrett sick." She said it like she was being considerate, like she cared. I looked at Garrett, waiting for him to say something, anything. But he was just staring at his plate, uncomfortable, clearly wanting to avoid confrontation. "Mom, if you're not feeling well, maybe you should rest," he said quietly. He didn't defend me, didn't question Sloane. He just let it happen. I felt something inside me die. The love I'd held onto so desperately, the hope that my son would choose me, that he'd see what was happening, it all crumbled. I gathered my purse with shaking hands, muttered something about being sorry, and walked to the door. Sloane followed me, playing the concerned daughter-in-law for Garrett's benefit. As I stepped outside, she squeezed my shoulder and said, just loud enough for me to hear, "This is my house now, my family. You're nothing but a burden he's too nice to cut loose, but I'll do it for him." I drove home in a daze. I don't remember the route I took or how I got there safely. When I walked through my front door, I collapsed on the couch and sobbed. Not just cried, sobbed. The kind of soul-deep wailing that comes from a place of absolute devastation. My son had watched his wife humiliate me and done nothing. He'd chosen her. And I knew, in that moment, that I'd lost him. Not to death, which I could have understood, but to something worse. I'd lost him to someone who hated me. And there was nothing I could do about it. I didn't leave my house for 3 days after that dinner. I couldn't face the world. Couldn't face the possibility of running into neighbors who'd ask how I was doing, how Garrett was. Wasn't I lucky to have family so close? I'd have to lie. And I was so tired of lying, so tired of pretending everything was fine when my entire world was falling apart. I stayed in my robe, drank too much tea, and stared at photos of Garrett as a little boy, his gap-toothed smile, his dinosaur pajamas, the way he used to hold my hand crossing the street. Lorelai called on the third day. I let it go to voicemail. She called again an hour later, and again after that. Finally, I answered, and she knew immediately something was wrong. "Mom, what happened?" Her voice was gentle but firm. I couldn't hold it in anymore. I told her everything. The forgotten birthday, the isolation, the dinner, the spit, the words Sloane had said. When I finished, there was silence on the other end. "Then that's abuse. Mom, what she's doing to you is elder abuse. You need to tell Garrett. You need to tell someone." But how could I? Who would believe me? I had no proof. No witnesses, just my word against Sloane's, and Garrett had already shown me whose side he was on. Lorelai wanted to fly out immediately, confront Garrett herself, but I begged her not to. I didn't want to cause more family fractures. I didn't want to force my daughters to choose sides against their brother, so I made her promise to stay out of it. At least for now, she agreed reluctantly, but I could hear the worry in her voice. "Mom, promise me you'll talk to someone. A therapist, a friend, someone. You can't carry this alone." I did try in my own way. I called my pastor, Reverend Elkins, and asked if we could meet. We sat in his office at the church, and I told him a watered-down version of what was happening, that my daughter-in-law and I weren't getting along, that I felt pushed away from my son. He listened with kind eyes and then said, "Family conflict is difficult, Delphine, but we must always forgive. Turn the other cheek. Perhaps Sloane is struggling with her own issues, and grace is what she needs from you." I left that meeting feeling worse than when I'd arrived. Even my faith community didn't understand. They thought I should forgive and forget, let Sloane walk all over me in the name of Christian charity. The isolation deepened. I stopped going to church, stopped answering calls from friends who wanted to check in. I let my garden go unweeded, my house uncleaned. Depression settled over me like a thick fog, and I couldn't find my way out. I thought about calling Garrett, trying one more time to reach him. But every time I picked up the phone, I remembered the look on his face that night, the way he'd chosen silence over defending me. I couldn't bear another rejection, so I stayed in my fog, alone, wondering if this was how I'd spend the rest of my days. Forgotten, discarded, waiting to die. Then, about 2 weeks after the dinner, something unexpected happened. I received a letter in the mail, not a bill or junk mail, a handwritten letter, addressed to me in careful cursive. There was no return address. I opened it with shaking hands and read, "Dear Mrs. Hargrove, you don't know me, but I know Sloane. I used to be her neighbor in Nevada before she moved to Iowa. I'm writing because I heard through mutual acquaintances that she's married and living there now. I feel compelled to warn you. Sloane is dangerous. She destroyed her first husband's relationship with his mother, isolated him from his family, and when his mother died, she didn't even let him attend the funeral. By the time he realized what she'd done, it was too late. They divorced, but the damage was done. Please protect yourself and your son. Sloane is very good at what she does. Sincerely, a friend." I read that letter 10 times. Then I sat down at my kitchen table and cried. Not from sadness this time, but from relief. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't overreacting. Someone else had seen what I was seeing. Someone else knew the truth. And more than that, I now had information. Information I could use. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than despair. I felt anger, hot, righteous anger that burned through the fog and gave me clarity. Sloane wanted to destroy my relationship with my son. She wanted to push me into a nursing home. Forgotten and alone, not on my watch. I was 72 years old, but I wasn't dead yet, and I wasn't going down without a fight. Drop a "Go Delphine" in the comments if you're rooting for her, because what she does next, it's everything. Keep watching. That anonymous letter became my lifeline. I read it so many times the paper started to wear thin at the creases. It validated everything I'd been feeling, every instinct I doubted. But more importantly, it gave me a path forward. If Sloane had done this before, there would be evidence. A trail. I just had to find it. I wasn't tech savvy. I barely knew how to use Facebook, but I knew someone who was. My neighbor's grandson, a 23-year-old named Marcus who worked in IT, had always been kind to me. He'd helped me set up my phone once and showed me how to video call with Lorelei. I called Marcus and asked if he'd come over for coffee. When he arrived, I didn't beat around the bush. I need your help finding information about someone online. Nothing illegal, just public records, social media, that kind of thing. Marcus looked intrigued. Like a background check? I nodded. Exactly. He asked for Sloane's full name, maiden name, and the city she'd lived in before Iowa. I gave him everything I knew, plus the information from the letter about her first husband. Marcus pulled out his laptop right there at my kitchen table and got to work. What he found was devastating and vindicating in equal measure. Sloane's social media went back years. On the surface, it looked perfect. Beautiful photos, inspirational quotes, posts about wellness and self-care. But Marcus dug deeper. He found her first husband's name, Trevor Mitchum. A quick search pulled up Trevor's profile, and there it was. The truth laid bare. In Trevor's photos from 5 years ago, you could see his mother at family gatherings, holidays, birthdays. Then, after he married Sloane, the mother disappeared from the photos entirely. There were posts from Trevor's friends asking where his mom was, why she wasn't at events anymore. Then, 3 years ago, an obituary. Patricia Mitchum had died of a stroke at 70 years old, alone, in a care facility. The obituary mentioned she was preceded in death by her husband and survived by her son Trevor, but there were no funeral details, no service information, just nothing. Marcus kept digging. He found forum posts, old Reddit threads where people who knew Trevor and his mother had discussed the situation anonymously. One person wrote Trevor's wife cut his mom off completely. When Patricia got sick, Sloane convinced Trevor she was faking it for attention. By the time he realized she was really dying, it was too late. She passed alone in a nursing home, and Sloane refused to let Trevor go to the funeral, said it would be too emotional, and he needed to focus on their life together. Their marriage fell apart after that. He couldn't forgive himself. Another post said, Sloane is a textbook narcissist. She isolates, manipulates, and discards. She did it to Trevor's whole family. My friend was Trevor's cousin and watched the whole thing happen. They tried to warn him, but Sloane had him convinced everyone was jealous of their relationship. I sat there, staring at Marcus's laptop screen, feeling sick. This wasn't just cruelty. This was a pattern. Sloane had perfected the art of destroying family bonds, isolating her partners, and making herself the center of their universe. And she was doing the exact same thing to Garrett. Marcus looked at me with concern. Mrs. Hargrove, this is serious. Your son needs to know about this. But I knew it wasn't that simple. If I showed Garrett this information, Sloane would spin it. She'd say I was obsessed, jealous, trying to ruin their marriage. She'd play the victim, and Garrett would believe her because he always believed her. I needed more than internet posts and old photos. I needed something concrete, something undeniable. Marcus helped me create a plan. First, I'd document everything, every canceled visit, every cruel comment, every instance of isolation. I'd start keeping a journal with dates and details. Second, we'd try to find Trevor Mitchum. If he'd talk to me, if he'd share his story, maybe, just maybe, Garrett would listen. And third, I'd start recording my interactions with Sloane. Nothing illegal, just using my phone to capture audio of our conversations. I knew it was risky. I knew Sloane would escalate if she caught me. But I also knew I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to give. Marcus set me up with a simple recording app on my phone and showed me how to use it discreetly. Just press this button in your pocket or purse before you talk to her. It'll record everything. He also helped me find Trevor Mitchum's email address through a professional networking site. That night, I sat down and wrote an email that took me 3 hours to compose. I introduced myself, explained my situation with Sloan, and asked if he'd be willing to talk. I hit send before I could second guess myself. Then I waited. 3 days later, I got a response. Trevor agreed to call me. And when he did, everything changed. Trevor Mitchum called me on a Sunday evening. His voice was tired, worn down by years of regret. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said, "I'm so sorry you're going through this. I know exactly what you're dealing with because Sloan did the same thing to my mother." For the next hour, he told me his story. How Sloan had been charming at first. How she'd slowly started criticizing his mother's intrusive behavior, her old-fashioned ways, her neediness. How she'd convinced him that his mother was the problem, that setting boundaries was healthy, that his mother needed to respect their marriage. "By the time I realized what was happening, it was too late," Trevor said, his voice cracking. "My mom got sick, she had a stroke, and needed help. Sloan convinced me it was manipulation, that my mom was exaggerating to get attention. I believed her. God help me, I believed her. I didn't visit for months. When I finally went to see her, she was in a care facility, barely responsive. She died 2 weeks later. Sloan wouldn't let me go to the funeral, said it would set back my healing, that I needed to focus on our future, not the past. I was so brainwashed, I agreed. It took me another year to realize I'd let my mother die alone because my wife was a monster. I listened with tears streaming down my face. This was Garrett's future if I didn't do something. This was what Sloan had planned for me. Isolation, abandonment, dying alone while my son stood by and watched. Trevor agreed to write a detailed letter to Garrett, explaining everything, giving permission for me to share his contact information if Garrett wanted to verify the story. "I should have spoken up sooner," Trevor said. "Maybe I could have stopped her from doing this to someone else. Please, Mrs. Hargrove, don't let your son make my mistakes." Armed with Trevor's letter, the documentation I'd gathered, and the anonymous warning letter, I decided it was time to confront Garrett. Not at his house where Sloan could control the narrative, but on neutral ground. I called him and asked him to meet me for coffee, just the two of us. He hesitated. I could hear Sloan saying something in the background, but eventually agreed. We met at a small cafe near my house on a Tuesday morning. Garrett looked uncomfortable, like he knew this wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. I didn't waste time with small talk. I pulled out the folder I'd prepared and slid it across the table. "I need you to read this," I said. Garrett looked confused but opened the folder. Inside was Trevor's letter, printouts of the forum posts, photos of Patricia Mitchum before and after Sloan entered Trevor's life, and my own journal documenting the past 2 years. Garrett's face went pale as he read. "Mom, what is this?" His voice was defensive. "This is the truth about your wife," I said, keeping my voice steady. "She's done this before. She isolated her first husband from his mother until the woman died alone, and she's doing the same thing to us." Garrett pushed the folder away like it burned him. "This is insane. You're obsessed. Sloan was right, you can't accept that I'm married, that I have my own life." My heart sank. She'd already planted that seed in his mind, prepared him for this exact conversation. "Garrett, please, just talk to Trevor. Call him, ask him yourself." But Garrett stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I'm not calling some stranger because my mother has decided to play detective. Sloan told me you've been acting weird, paranoid. She said you'd probably try something like this." I didn't want to believe her, but here we are. I felt desperate, cornered. I pulled out my phone and played the recording from the dinner, the one where I'd managed to capture part of Sloane's whispered threat. It wasn't perfect, the audio was muffled, but you could hear her say nursing home and old hag. Garrett listened, his jaw tight. When it finished, he said, "That could be anything. That could be edited. I can't believe you're recording conversations in my house." He wasn't hearing me. Couldn't hear me. Sloan had done her job too well. She spit in my food, Garrett, I said, my voice breaking. She told me to enjoy it because they won't feed me this well in a nursing home. Your wife deliberately contaminated my food and threatened me. And you did nothing. Garrett's face flushed red. You're lying. Sloane would never do that. You're making this up because you're lonely and jealous and can't stand that I'm happy. Each word hit me like a physical blow. My own son was calling me a liar, choosing his wife over me, just like Sloane had planned. I gathered my folder, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the papers. When you finally see the truth, when she's isolated you from everyone who loves you, and you wake up one day realizing you're completely alone, remember this conversation. Remember that I tried to warn you. I walked out of that cafe knowing I'd lost my son. At least for now. Maybe forever. But I'd done what I could. I'd told him the truth. What he did with it was up to him. I drove home in silence, and when I got there I did the only thing I could think of. I called Lorelai and told her everything. It was time to let my daughters help. Time to stop fighting this battle alone. The next 6 months were the hardest of my life. Garrett stopped speaking to me entirely. He blocked my number, changed his social media settings so I couldn't see his posts. Sloane had won, or so it seemed. But something unexpected happened. Lorelai and Marjorie rallied around me. They flew in together a week after my failed confrontation with Garrett and staged what they called an intervention, not for me, but for the whole situation. They hired a family therapist who specialized in parental alienation, and we started having regular video sessions. It helped to name what was happening, to understand I wasn't crazy or overreacting. What Sloane was doing had a name: elder abuse through familial estrangement. My daughters also contacted Trevor Mitchum and got his permission to reach out to some of Garrett's close friends, people who'd known him since college before Sloane. They shared the information carefully, not as gossip, but as genuine concern. Slowly, people started noticing things. One of Garrett's best friends, a man named Richard, who'd been his college roommate, mentioned to another friend that Garrett had become distant, that Sloane controlled his schedule so completely he couldn't even grab a beer without her permission. The friend mentioned he'd noticed the same thing. Word spread quietly through Garrett's circle. People were paying attention now. Then, about 4 months after our coffee shop confrontation, something shifted. Garrett's grandmother on Walter's side, his father's mother Estelle, turned 90. Estelle lived in a nursing home but was sharp as ever. She'd always been close with Garrett, and she invited him to her birthday celebration at the facility. Sloane didn't want to go. Nursing homes depressed her, she said, but Garrett insisted. It was his grandmother's 90th birthday. Even Sloane couldn't argue against that without looking heartless. I didn't know any of this at the time, but Richard, who attended the party, told me later what happened. Garrett spent an hour with Estelle, and at one point she asked about me. "Where's Delphine? I haven't seen her in months. Is she okay?" Garrett, uncomfortable, said we'd had a falling out. Estelle, who'd lost her own son, my Walter, and knew the pain of that loss, looked Garrett dead in the eye and said, "Boy, life is short. I lost my son too young. Don't waste time on petty fights. If your mother is still breathing, you go to her and make it right." Something about hearing it from Estelle, in that nursing home, surrounded by elderly people who'd outlived children and spouses and siblings, hit Garrett hard. He called me that night. I almost didn't answer when I saw his name on my screen, but something made me pick up. "Mom?" His voice was small, uncertain. "I need to talk to you. Can I come over tomorrow?" I said yes, not because I expected an apology, but because he was still my son. He showed up the next afternoon alone. Sloane didn't know he was there. He told her he had a work meeting. We sat in my living room, and for a long time neither of us spoke. Then Garrett said, "I've been thinking about Trevor Mitchum, about his mother, about what you said." I waited. "I called him," Garrett continued. "I needed to hear it myself. And Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Garrett broke down then, really broke down. sobbing in a way I hadn't seen since he was a child. He told me everything. How Sloane had been controlling every aspect of his life, how she'd isolated him from his friends, monitored his phone, criticized everyone he cared about until he felt like she was the only person who understood him, how she'd been pressuring him to put me in a nursing home, saying I was getting too old to live alone, that it was his responsibility as a son to handle me, how she'd told him that the dinner where she'd been nice to me was actually a test, and that I'd failed by refusing to eat the potatoes, proving I didn't appreciate her efforts. She told me you were paranoid, that you needed psychological help, that your behavior was embarrassing, Garrett said, wiping his eyes. And I believed her because I wanted to believe her. Because admitting she was the problem meant admitting I'd chosen wrong, that I'd hurt you for someone who was lying to me. We talked for hours. I showed him everything again, the letters, the documentation, the recordings. This time, he really looked, really listened, and he saw the truth he'd been avoiding. Garrett left Sloane 2 weeks later. It wasn't easy. She threatened him, cried, told him he was making a mistake, that I'd manipulated him, that he'd regret this. She even showed up at my house once, screaming on my front porch about how I'd destroyed her marriage. I called the police. Garrett filed for divorce. It took 8 months to finalize, and Sloane fought him every step of the way. But he stood firm, and slowly, painfully, we began to rebuild our relationship. It's been a year now since Garrett and I reconciled. He lives in a small apartment and is in therapy working through the manipulation and gaslighting he experienced. We have Sunday dinners again, sometimes at my house, sometimes at his place, sometimes at Lorelei's when she visits. They're not perfect. There's still hurt to work through, trust to rebuild. But we're trying. And that's more than I had before. I'm 73 now. My garden is blooming again. I go to church. I answer my phone when friends call. I'm not waiting to die anymore. I'm living. And I learned something through all of this. It's never too late to fight for the people you love. Never too late to stand up for yourself. Never too late to say, this isn't okay and I deserve better. Sloane tried to bury me in isolation and silence. But I'm still here, still standing, still Delphine Hargrove, and I'm not going anywhere. If this story touched you, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, you are never too old, never too powerless, never too alone to fight for what's right. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for witnessing my pain and my triumph. You matter. Your story matters. And if you're going through something similar, please know you're not alone. There is hope. There is healing. There is life after the darkness. Keep going. In the meantime, on the final screen, I'm leaving you with 2 of the channel's most beloved stories. I'm sure they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until now.